In the abandoned desert town of Las Ventana, a weary journalist named Joanna Brooks was about to unlock more than just the front doors of a long-dead casino. What started as a simple property inspection under the burning Nevada sun took a shocking turn when she came face to face with the ghosts of gangsters who never left. Joanna Brooks wasn't your typical reporter. For nearly a decade, she had chased corruption across state lines, known for her relentless pursuit of the truth and for the scandal that ended her career. When she encountered a desert coyote slipping through the broken doors of the Golden Ace Casino, she had no idea she was walking into danger, buried beneath decades of silence. Joanna followed the animal inside, her curiosity stronger than her fear. A decision that would lead to the discovery of a hidden vault and $44 million in mob cash, setting off a chain of events more explosive than any headline she'd ever written. What began as a desperate attempt to reclaim her reputation would become a descent into the moral underworld of Las Ventana. The forgotten casino town and Joanna herself would never be the same after the house decided to play one final hand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Joanna Brooks stared at the deed in her hands, the ink still wet from the county clerk's nervous signature. 15 cents. That's what she'd paid for the entire Golden Ace Casino. 3 stories of Art Deco architecture slowly surrendering to the Nevada desert. The clerk had practically shoved the papers across the counter, avoiding her eyes like she'd just purchased her own coffin. But why would anyone sell a casino for the price of a postage stamp? Las Ventana sprawled before her like a fever dream, dying in the afternoon heat. Neon signs still buzzed and flickered along what used to be the main strip, but half the bulbs were dead, spelling out fractured promises. Elden CE, Isel-MNT, Inez. The town hadn't burned out so much as slowly bled to death after the Vegas expansion pulled away its lifeblood, leaving behind only dust, regret, and the kind of silence that remembers too much. Joanna stood before the Golden Ace, her battered suitcase at her feet, her typewriter case clutched in one hand. The building towered above the other structures, its facade still showing traces of glamour beneath decades of neglect. Art Deco sunbursts radiated from the corners. The marquee hung at an angle, missing half its letters. The boarded windows stared down at her like closed eyes. No scorch marks, no fire damage, no sign of the blaze everyone claimed destroyed it. She'd done her research before the auction. The official story said the Golden Ace burned in 1963 during what the newspapers politely called unfortunate circumstances. But standing here now, the building looked less destroyed than deliberately abandoned, as if everyone had simply walked away one night and never looked back. The townspeople watched her from across the dusty street, not with curiosity, not with welcome. Something else entirely, something that made her reporter's instincts prickle. Mrs. Henderson, from what passed for a general store, kept glancing at the casino's entrance, then quickly away, like the building itself might reach out and grab her. Joanna knew that look. She'd seen it before in interview rooms and courthouses, the expression of people hiding something that keeps them awake at night. The auction seller, a lawyer named Pemberton with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, had mentioned only one condition during the sale. "Whatever you find in there, Miss Brooks, it ain't my responsibility anymore." Then he'd climbed into his Lincoln and driven away before she could ask what that meant, leaving a trail of dust and unspoken warnings. Joanna pulled the brass key from her pocket, feeling its weight. The metal was warm from the desert sun, or maybe from something else. As she approached the heavy wooden doors, she could swear she heard something from inside. Not quite a sound. More like an echo of something that had happened long ago, still reverberating through the empty rooms. The key turned with surprising ease. The door opened, releasing air that tasted of dust, cigarette smoke, and secrets kept for 20 years. She stepped inside. The lobby took her breath away. Marble floors stretched toward a grand staircase, its red carpet faded, but intact. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, their pendants thick with dust. The main casino floor spread out before her, a vast space filled with silent slot machines and card tables covered in yellowed sheets. Everything was perfectly preserved, like a photograph of 1963 waiting to be developed. The smell hit her next, bourbon and smoke and something metallic underneath, like old pennies. The air felt heavy, reluctant to move. Joanna set down her suitcase and walked deeper into the casino. Her footsteps echoed wrong, too loud, as if the building was listening to her movements. Shafts of sunlight pierced through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating dust particles that danced like tiny ghosts. The roulette wheels still had chips scattered across the felt. The bar still held bottles, their contents long evaporated into sticky residue. Behind the cashier's cage, the safe door stood open, revealing nothing but empty darkness. Too clean, she thought, too preserved. This wasn't abandonment. This was a stage set, waiting for actors who would never return. She ran her fingers along the bar's polished surface, her journalist's mind cataloguing inconsistencies. The wood gleamed as if someone had been maintaining it. Fresh scratches marked the floor near the stage, tracks leading toward the back rooms. Her typewriter case felt suddenly heavy in her hand, weighted with the promise of a story she didn't yet understand. By the time the sun began to set, Joanna had explored 2 floors and filled 3 pages of notes. Observations, questions, the kind of investigative threads that used to be her life before everything fell apart. Before she'd exposed to politicians, mob ties with evidence that turned out to be planted. Before her career became a cautionary tale about checking your sources. Her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since Reno. The diner across the street glowed with neon warmth, its sign reading Lydia's Place, in cursive script that belonged to another era. The woman behind the counter looked like she'd stepped out of a different decade. Lydia Crane wore her silver hair in victory rolls, her red lipstick perfectly applied, despite there being no one to impress. She was wiping down the counter when Joanna entered, but her hands stopped moving the moment she saw who walked through the door. "So you're the one who bought it," Lydia said. Not a question, Joanna slid onto a bar stool. "News travels fast. In Las Ventana, news is all we have left." Lydia poured coffee without asking, the dark liquid steaming in a white ceramic mug. "That building remembers everything. Buildings don't remember. People do. Maybe." Lydia's eyes, sharp despite her age, studied Joanna's face. "But some places hold on to things longer than people can bear to. What brings a woman like you to a town like this?" "A woman like me. Educated. Running from something." Lydia smiled without warmth. "I used to be the same way. Came here in '59 as a showgirl at the Golden Ace. Thought I'd stay a season, make enough money to get to California. That was 30 years ago." Joanna wrapped her hands around the mug, grateful for its warmth as the desert night began to creep in. "What happened? Why did everyone leave?" "They didn't all leave." Lydia's voice dropped lower. "Some just stopped talking about what they saw. And what did they see?" Lydia turned away, busying herself with dishes that didn't need washing. "Order first, Miss Brooks. Questions later. And a word of advice. That building you bought, maybe don't spend the night there just yet. The Golden Ace has rules of its own." Joanna wanted to press further, but her reporter's instincts told her to wait. People like Lydia didn't spill secrets over the first cup of coffee. Trust had to be earned, especially in a town built on broken promises. She ordered meatloaf and spent the rest of dinner making small talk. Learning that Lydia had been married once to a dealer named Eddie, who disappeared the night of the fire that wasn't a fire. Learning that Tommy Vega ran the only radio station from his garage, broadcasting to an audience that had mostly moved away. Learning that Las Ventana had exactly 47 permanent residents, down from 2,000 in its heyday. By the time Joanna returned to the casino, full darkness had settled over the town like a shroud. She'd rented a room above the general store. Mrs. Henderson had accepted her money without a word, but something drew her back to the Golden Ace. The building looked different at night. The broken neon still flickered weakly, casting strange shadows across the facade. Joanna unlocked the door and stepped inside, flipping the light switch out of habit. Nothing happened. The power had been disconnected years ago. She pulled out her flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. The casino looked haunted now, the covered tables like shrouded bodies, the silent machines like tombstones. Then she heard it. Faint at first, so quiet she thought she'd imagined it. But no, there it was again, music, jazz music, the kind they played in the 50s and 60s, with horns and piano, and a sultry singer crooning about heartbreak and lonely nights. Joanna's heart hammered in her chest. The power wasn't connected. There was no source for the sound, but the music continued, echoing from somewhere deep in the building, as if the Golden Ace itself was dreaming of the nights when it was alive with laughter and money and sin. She stood frozen in the lobby, her flashlight beam trembling slightly in her hand. The rational part of her brain insisted there had to be an explanation. A radio left behind, an old jukebox with battery power somehow still functioning, but the music felt wrong. Not playing from a source, but seeping from the walls themselves, a memory made audible. Joanna backed toward the door, her earlier confidence evaporating. Lydia's words echoed in her mind. That building remembers everything. As she stepped outside and locked the door behind her, Joanna made herself a promise. Tomorrow, in daylight, she would find the source of that music. She would uncover what everyone in this town was so desperate to forget, because if there was one thing Joanna Brooks knew how to do, it was dig until she found the truth. Even if, especially if, that truth was buried beneath 20 years of silence and fear. She just didn't know yet that some truths are buried for a reason. Morning came too bright and too hot. The Nevada sun turning the Golden Ace into an oven by 9 a.m. Joanna returned with a crowbar, work gloves, and the stubborn determination that had made her both a great journalist and a reckless one. No phantom music greeted her in daylight. The casino lay silent and still, dust motes drifting through sunbeams like lazy swimmers. But Joanna couldn't shake the memory of those jazz notes, couldn't convince herself she'd imagined them. She started her search methodically, working from the lobby toward the main showroom. The stage dominated the far end of the casino floor, its red velvet curtains so faded they'd turned nearly brown. Old footlights lined the edge. Behind the curtains, she found remnants of props and set pieces, the skeletal remains of entertainment long dead. Joanna stepped onto the stage, her boots echoing on the hollow wooden platform. Something felt off about the acoustics. Her footsteps sounded wrong, like she was walking over empty space. She knelt down, running her hands across the floorboards. Most were nailed tight, aged and warped from decades of neglect. But near the center, where a spotlight might have once illuminated a singer or dancer, the boards felt different, looser, newer than the others around them. Her fingers found the edge of a seam, cleverly hidden in the natural grain of the wood. Joanna pulled out the crowbar and wedged it into the gap. The board resisted, then suddenly popped free with a crack that echoed through the empty casino. Beneath it, darkness. And below that, the unmistakable outline of a trapdoor. Joanna's hands trembled as she pried up more boards, revealing a square hatch maybe 3 feet across. A brass ring served as a handle, tarnished green with age. She wrapped her fingers around it and pulled. The hinges screamed in protest, but the door opened, releasing air that smelled of earth and metal and something chemical that made her eyes water. Her flashlight beam revealed a narrow staircase descending into blackness, the steps concrete rather than wood. Professional maintenance corridor, she thought. Every casino had them, secret passages for dealers and security to move without being seen by patrons. But this one had been deliberately concealed, hidden beneath the stage, where no routine maintenance would require access. Joanna descended slowly, testing each step before committing her weight. The temperature dropped with every foot she went down, the air growing cooler and damper. The staircase turned once, then again, going deeper than the casino's foundation should extend. At the bottom, her flashlight revealed a corridor barely wide enough for two people to pass. The walls were reinforced concrete, the ceiling lined with pipes and conduits that had long since stopped carrying anything useful. The metallic smell grew stronger here, mixing with something else, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The corridor opened into a room that shouldn't exist. Joanna's flashlight swept across stacks of wooden crates, dozens of them arranged in neat rows like soldiers waiting for orders. Each crate bore numbers stenciled in black paint, codes that meant nothing to her but suggested careful organization. Water damage marked some of the boxes, and rust bloomed on the metal corners, but most remained sealed. Her hands shook as she approached the nearest crate. The lock had corroded away, leaving only a bent hasp. She worked the crowbar into the gap and pried. The wood cracked, splintered, then gave way. Inside, wrapped in yellowed plastic that crinkled like old skin, lay stacks of currency, bills bound with paper bands arranged in neat bricks. Joanna pulled one out, the plastic crackling as she unwrapped it. Hundreds, all hundreds. Old hundreds with designs from the early 60s, before the security features and color changes. The bill in her hand felt real, looked real, smelled real. She checked another stack, same and another, all of them authentic, as far as she could tell. Her flashlight beam swept across the other crates. If they all contained the same thing, if they were all this full, Joanna's breath came faster, shallower. She opened another crate. More money. And another. More still. The room held at least 50 crates, maybe more in the shadows, beyond her light's reach. She did the math in her head, journalist's training making her estimate and calculate even as her hands trembled. If each crate held even a conservative $1 million, and there were 50 crates, 50 million, maybe more, maybe much more. Jesus Christ, she whispered, and her voice echoed strangely in the underground room, as if the space itself was larger than it appeared. The money wasn't just forgotten. Money like this was never forgotten. This was hidden, stashed, deliberately placed and deliberately concealed, waiting for someone to come back for it. But no one had. For 20 years, these millions had sat beneath the Golden Ace Casino, buried and silent, while the building above rotted and the town slowly died. Joanna sat down hard on one of the crates, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Questions cascaded through her mind, each one leading to darker implications. Whose money was this? Why hadn't they retrieved it? What happened that made hiding millions in a basement vault seem like the safer option than banking it legitimately? She thought of Lydia's words about the fire that wasn't a fire, about things that burned from the inside out, about trust and reputations destroyed. This was mob money, had to be. Las Ventana, in its heyday, had been a way station between Los Angeles and Vegas, a place where deals could be made away from the bright lights and watching eyes. The Golden Ace would have been perfect for laundering cash, for hiding money from federal investigators, for storing wealth that couldn't be explained or taxed. Joanna stood and forced herself to think like the journalist she'd once been. She photographed the crates with the small camera she carried, documenting the scene. She took close-ups of the bills, the serial numbers, the condition of the containers, evidence, proof, the foundation of a story that could restore her career, vindicate her methods, prove she was still the investigative reporter who'd once won awards and respect. But as she climbed back up the stairs toward daylight, a darker thought crept in. If this money had been waiting here for 20 years, untouched and unclaimed, maybe it was because everyone who knew about it was dead. Maybe the silence in Las Ventana wasn't just about keeping secrets. Maybe it was about survival. The music she'd heard last night suddenly made terrible sense. The Golden Ace wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by memory, by the weight of what had happened here, by blood and betrayal and fortunes that came at an unbearable price. Joanna emerged into the showroom, blinking in the sudden brightness. She replaced the floorboards carefully, trying to make them look undisturbed. Her hands still shook. Her mind raced with possibilities, plans, fears. She could call the FBI, turn it over to federal authorities, do the right thing and let them sort out whose money this had been, whose crimes it represented. Or she could keep quiet, take the money and disappear. Start over somewhere far from here with a fortune that no one would ever connect to her. Or, most dangerously, she could investigate. Find out who hid this money, why it was never retrieved, what happened to the people who'd known about it. Write the story that would finally redeem her reputation and prove she'd been right all along, to trust her instincts over convenience. Joanna walked out of the Golden Ace into the brutal desert sun, squinting at the too bright day. Across the street, Lydia stood in the doorway of her diner, watching. Their eyes met for a moment, and Joanna saw something in the older woman's expression. Not surprise, not curiosity, recognition. Lydia knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not the exact location, but she knew the Golden Ace held secrets that could destroy or redeem, depending on how they were handled. Joanna nodded slightly, acknowledging the unspoken warning, and headed back to her rented room. She needed to think, to plan, to decide whether finding the truth was worth the price it always demanded from her. But deep down, she already knew the answer. Truth was the only currency Joanna Brooks had left, and she'd bet everything on it before. She just hadn't realized yet that Las Ventana played by different rules, where the house always won, and the only way to survive was to change the game entirely. Joanna's resolution to keep the discovery secret lasted exactly 12 hours. She woke to the sound of Tommy Vega's voice, crackling through someone's radio, his excited patter carrying through the thin walls of her rented room. And folks, you're not going to believe this, but our little town has itself a genuine mystery millionaire. That's right, the woman who bought the Golden Ace Casino for 15 cents. And I mean 15 actual cents. Might have just stumbled onto the biggest story to hit Las Ventana since the night we don't talk about. Joanna's blood ran cold. She threw off the sheets and dressed quickly, her mind racing. How did he know? She'd been so careful. Unless someone had been watching the casino, unless someone had seen her enter and noticed how long she'd stayed inside, noticed the way she'd looked when she emerged, or unless someone had always known what was down there and had been waiting to see who would find it. By the time she made it to Lydia's diner for coffee, the entire town had transformed. Faces that had been carefully neutral yesterday now watched her with open speculation. Mrs. Henderson actually smiled when Joanna passed the general store. 3 strangers sat at the lunch counter, men she'd never seen before, nursing coffee and pretending not to stare at her reflection in the mirror behind the pie case. Lydia poured her coffee without a word, but her expression said everything. "I warned you. I didn't tell anyone," Joanna said quietly. "Didn't have to." Lydia wiped down the counter with precise, controlled movements. "Tommy's got binoculars and too much time on his hands. He saw you go into that casino yesterday morning and not come out for 3 hours. Saw the way you looked when you left. Boy's got a nose for stories, even if he doesn't always know what they mean. There's no story. Sugar, there's always a story in Las Ventana. Question is who gets to tell it." Lydia leaned in closer. "That money down there, it ain't forgotten. It's just been waiting for someone stupid enough or desperate enough to find it. Now that you have, the desert's going to start giving up its other secrets too." One of the strangers at the counter turned slightly, his interest obvious despite his attempts at discretion. Joanna recognized the look. She'd seen it in courtrooms and police stations. The focused attention of someone who knew more than they were letting on. She left cash on the counter and headed back to the casino, feeling eyes on her back the whole way. The key felt heavier in her pocket now, weighted with knowledge that had become a burden overnight. The Golden Ace looked the same from outside, but Joanna knew it would never feel the same again. That underground room had changed everything, transformed her 15-cent investment into something far more valuable and far more dangerous. She spent the morning trying to act normally, cleaning the lobby and making notes about potential renovations. But every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hide someone watching. The paranoia she'd learned during her journalism days crept back in. The heightened awareness that came from investigating people who had everything to lose. At noon, she found the first note. It had been slipped under the front door, a folded piece of paper with no envelope. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. "You're digging in someone else's grave." Joanna's hands shook as she read it again. Not a threat exactly, more like a warning. Or maybe just a statement of fact, delivered by someone who knew exactly what lay beneath the casino floor. She locked the door and sat in the dusty lobby, the note in her hand, trying to think clearly. Tommy Vega's broadcast had put a target on her back. Now everyone who'd ever heard whispers about the Golden Ace's secrets would be paying attention. Some out of curiosity, others out of greed, and maybe one or two out of desperation to keep those secrets buried. Her reporter's instincts warred with her survival instincts. She should leave, pack her suitcase, abandon the casino, disappear before whoever wrote that note decided to deliver the message more forcefully. The smart play was to walk away from 15 cents and $44 million, and whatever blood-soaked history connected them. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, but Joanna Brooks had never been good at walking away from a story, especially not one that might finally answer the question that haunted her most. Was she still the journalist who could find truth in darkness, or had she become just another casualty of her own ambition? That evening, Lydia found her still sitting in the lobby, the note on her lap, staring at nothing. "They're coming," Lydia said without preamble. "The ones who remember. The ones who were there the night the Golden Ace really died. Who? Does it matter? When the desert smells money, it never forgets. And it never forgives." Lydia sat down on one of the covered chairs, dust rising around her like smoke. "I knew a man once, loved him more than I loved breathing. Eddie Malone, best dealer in Nevada, hands so fast you couldn't follow them even if you tried. He was working here the night everything went to hell. The fire that wasn't a fire, the reckoning that looked like a fire." Lydia's eyes grew distant. "There were men here that night, important men from California. They brought money to be counted, sorted, cleaned. The Golden Ace was a washing machine for dirty cash, sugar. Everyone knew it, everyone benefited from it, and everyone pretended they didn't. What happened? Someone got greedy. Someone always does." Lydia stood, brushing dust from her dress. "Eddie disappeared that night. They told me he ran off with a showgirl from Reno, but I knew better. Eddie wouldn't run. Eddie knew too much to run." Joanna felt the weight of understanding settle over her. "He's down there, isn't he? In that room with the money?" Lydia's smile was sad and small. "I don't know. I never had the courage to look. But I know the money stayed, because the people who could claim it all died or disappeared. $44 million in unmarked bills. And everyone who knew the combination to that vault ended up in the ground or in the wind." "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because you remind me of myself when I was young. Too smart for your own good. Too stubborn to quit even when quitting's the only smart choice." Lydia moved toward the door. "And because if you're going to dig up the past, you should know it's got teeth. Sharp ones." After Lydia left, Joanna sat in the growing darkness, thinking about Eddie Malone and greed and the way money could poison everything it touched. She thought about the note under her door and Tommy Vega's broadcast and the strangers who'd started appearing in town, like vultures circling carrion. She thought about her own past, the story that had destroyed her career, the planted evidence that had seemed so real until it wasn't. She'd been so sure she was right, so convinced she'd found corruption that needed exposing. And she had been right about the corruption. She'd just been wrong about the evidence, wrong about who she could trust, wrong about how far powerful people would go to protect their secrets. The lesson should have been clear. Some truths weren't worth the price of finding them. But as Joanna sat in the abandoned casino, Listening to the building settle and groan around her, she made her decision. Not because it was smart, not because it was safe, but because the alternative was to remain the woman she'd become after her failure. Careful, cautious, convinced that truth and survival were mutually exclusive. She would investigate the Golden Ace's history. She would find out whose money filled those crates and why it had never been reclaimed. She would write the story, document the truth, and let the consequences fall where they would, even if it cost her everything. Again. The next morning, a man arrived in Las Ventana, driving a silver Cadillac that looked absurdly out of place against the desert-worn buildings and dusty streets. He wore an expensive suit despite the heat and moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Joanna watched from the casino's window as he parked in front of Lydia's diner and went inside. Through the glass, she saw him talking to Lydia, saw the older woman's expression grow carefully neutral, saw her shake her head once firmly. Then the man turned, looking directly at the Golden Ace, and smiled, even from a distance. Joanna recognized something in that smile. Not friendliness, not welcome, something colder and more calculated, like a gambler looking at cards. He knew he'd already won. He crossed the street with deliberate slowness, his shoes leaving prints in the dust that would blow away in the next wind. When he reached the casino's door, he didn't knock. He simply tried the handle, found it locked, and then pulled out his own key, a key that shouldn't exist. The door swung open, and Vincent Morelli stepped into the Golden Ace Casino like he'd never left. "Hello, Joanna," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I believe we have some things to discuss about our shared property." The day he walked into the Golden Ace, the air changed. Even the dust seemed to hesitate. I was standing near the roulette tables, brushing decades of grime off the velvet, when the door creaked open. Sunlight sliced through the gloom, framing a tall man in a grey suit that didn't belong in a ghost town. His shoes gleamed like they'd never met dirt. His smile was polite, practiced, the kind that came with an agenda. "Joanna Brooks," he said, his voice smooth enough to slip through cigarette smoke. "You've got quite the fixer-upper. I didn't remember giving my name to anyone in Las Ventana. Word travels," he added, as if reading my thoughts. "Especially when someone buys the most cursed building in Nevada." I crossed my arms. "And you are?" "Vincent Morelli. Friends call me Vince." I didn't reply. He stepped closer, studying the casino's wreckage like a man assessing an old lover. The way his eyes moved over the walls, the ceiling beams, the faded bar stools. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. "Used to work here," he said finally. "Back when the lights still meant something." That caught my attention. "You were with the Golden Ace?" "Pit boss," he smiled faintly. "Until the night everything went to hell." The way he said it made the words feel rehearsed, like a line he'd used too many times to count. I'd heard rumors from Lydia Crane. The casino had burned down, though no one agreed on how. Some said faulty wiring. Others whispered about a gunfight in the vault. But looking at Vince, I had the feeling he didn't believe in accidents. "I'm just here to restore the property," I said carefully. "Nothing more." "Sure." He walked toward the main stage, his polished shoes stirring old confetti from a forgotten New Year's Eve. "But restoration starts with knowing what you're restoring, doesn't it?" He knelt, tapping his knuckles against the floorboards. I felt my stomach tighten. He'd stopped exactly where the trapdoor was hidden. "You've already been underneath, haven't you?" he asked softly. My pulse jumped. "You're trespassing, Mr. Morelli." He smiled again. "That's not an answer." I tried to deflect. "If you're here to make an offer, you're wasting your time. The place isn't for sale." "Oh, everything's for sale, Miss Brooks." His tone shifted, colder now, more honest. "Even the truth." He straightened up and dusted off his hands. "You found the vault, didn't you?" I didn't answer, but silence can be as loud as a confession. Vince looked around, almost wistful. "I used to handle the count room. Every night we'd haul in more money than the town could dream of. But it wasn't about the cards or the odds. It was about control. The bishop understood that better than anyone. That name, the bishop. The one Lydia said was still alive. "He's dead," I lied. "Maybe. Vince walked toward the bar, trailing a finger across the counter's cracked surface. But dead men have a way of leaving instructions. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, but didn't light it. You want my advice? Don't call the cops. Don't call the feds. You've stumbled onto something that doesn't belong to the living anymore. Then who does it belong to? I asked. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. People like us, Joanna. The ones smart enough to see value where others see ruin. I hated how my name sounded in his mouth. Let's make the past pay us back, he said, lowering his voice. You've got the deed, I've got the connections. We move the money quietly, invest it in the right channels. Las Ventana breathes again. You get your reputation back. I get my redemption. Everyone wins. He said it so calmly, like laundering blood money was just another business proposition. Why me? I asked. Why not do it yourself? Because, he said, stepping closer, you're clean, untouched, the last honest name left in a town full of ghosts. That makes you useful. His honesty chilled me more than any lie could. I turned away, pretending to busy myself with a broken chair. If you think I'm going to help you launder mob money, you've got the wrong woman. I think, he said, you're tired of being the right one. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence hummed low and dangerous. Outside, the wind kicked up sand that whispered against the boarded windows like a warning. Vince exhaled slowly, then reached into his coat pocket and set something on the bar. A poker chip. Gold-edged, stamped with the old casino's insignia, an ace of spades crowned with a halo. I kept one, he said. Souvenir from the night the bishop walked away and left the rest of us to burn. The chip gleamed faintly under the weak light. Consider it a reminder, he added. The house always wins, but only if you play. He left without another word. I watched his reflection disappear from the cracked mirror behind the bar, feeling like I'd just shaken hands with temptation itself. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept circling my mind like vultures. You're tired of being the right one. Maybe I was. I'd spent years chasing the truth, and it had cost me everything, my job, my credibility, my sense of purpose. Still, something about him didn't add up. If Vince wanted the money, why hadn't he taken it already? Why lure me into it? I decided to check the vault. The trapdoor groaned as I lifted it, the smell of dust and old metal wafting up. I climbed down the narrow steps, flashlight trembling in my hand. The crates were still there, rows of them, silent sentinels guarding their fortune. Except one. The nearest crate had been pried open. The lid lay sideways, and the bundles of bills inside were scattered, like someone had rummaged through them in a hurry. I knelt, heart pounding. The cash wasn't gone, just disturbed. A warning, not a robbery. Whoever did this wanted me to know they'd been here. Footprints, 2 sets, one small, boot-shaped, the other larger and heavier. Both led toward the back of the vault, where the concrete wall showed faint scuff marks. I followed them to a narrow service corridor and found a single cigarette butt still smoldering. Vince's brand. He'd been here after all, and yet something else bothered me. The footprints overlapped, like 2 people had walked together, then split. That's when I heard it, the faintest creak above me. Someone else was in the casino. I switched off the flashlight, letting the dark swallow me. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pressed my back to the cold wall. The sound of footsteps moved across the floorboards above, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was, they knew the place well. When the footsteps faded, I climbed back up, careful not to make a sound. The main floor was empty, but the front door stood ajar. Letting in a strip of moonlight, pinned to the doorframe was a playing card, the King of Spades, with a single word scrawled across it in black ink. Soon. The next morning, Las Ventana looked different. The desert light had a way of bleaching everything, but today it felt harsher. Like the sun was burning through layers of secrecy instead of sand. I drove to Lydia Crane's diner, needing coffee and a voice that didn't lie. The bell over the door gave a half-hearted jingle when I walked in. The place was empty except for Lydia behind the counter, polishing a glass that probably didn't need polishing. You look like you saw a ghost, she said without looking up. Maybe I did. Which one? The kind that wears nice suits and knows too much about me. She stopped moving. Vince Morelli came back, didn't he? I blinked. You knew he was still alive? Lydia sighed. In this town, the dead just get quieter. Not cleaner. I told her about the vault, about the opened crate, about the card, with soon written on it. She listened without interrupting, the lines around her eyes deepening with every word. When I finished, she poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one to me. You need to leave that place alone, Joanna. It remembers people, calls them back. Every gambler thinks he's the one who will beat the house, but the house always keeps the souls it wants. I'm not a gambler, I said. She gave a weary smile. Honey, everyone in Las Ventana is. That night I returned to the Golden Ace. I told myself it was to lock things up, to make sure no one else broke in. But deep down, I knew it was the story calling, the same instinct that ruined my career, the itch to uncover what others buried. The casino's interior was colder than before. My footsteps echoed across the showroom, each one swallowed by the darkness beyond the stage. The smell of smoke had thickened somehow, though there hadn't been a flame in decades. When I reached the trapdoor, I noticed something else, footprints again. Fresh this time, still wet with desert grit. They led from the vault stairs to the back exit. I followed them outside, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The trail curved around the side of the building toward the old parking lot, then stopped abruptly. No tire marks, no sign of departure. Just one thing lying in the dirt, a tarnished police badge. I picked it up. The nameplate was faded, but the engraving was still legible. Detective Harold Kincaid. The name struck a chord. I'd read it in the old case files. He was the lead investigator back in '43, the one who closed the casino fire as an accident. I turned at the sound of gravel crunching. A man stood a few yards away, tall but stooped, wrapped in a trench coat that had seen better decades. His face was carved with time, his eyes sharp despite the exhaustion in them. I was wondering when we'd meet, he said. His voice carried that rasp of a lifelong smoker. Joanna Brooks, the journalist who thought she could outdig the devil. And you must be the cop who buried him, I replied. Kincaid gave a dry laugh. Touché. He stepped closer, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. I've been watching you, kid, ever since you bought this place. Why? Because I needed to see if you'd find what I never could. He reached into his coat and pulled out a yellowed photo, a group shot of casino staff from 1942. There he was, younger, standing beside a man I recognized from Lydia's stories, Ray the Bishop Santoro. I was investigating money laundering tied to the Santoro syndicate, Kincaid said. But the case went sideways. People died. I got paid to shut up. So you took a bribe, I said. He didn't flinch. And it's eaten me alive every damn day since. The bishop vanished, the money disappeared, and this town pretended nothing happened. I thought the truth was gone for good, until you showed up. He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something I recognized, guilt looking for a second chance. What's in that vault, he continued, wasn't just stolen cash. It was a war fund. Every dollar dirty, meant to rebuild the mob's empire out west. The bishop hid it before the feds could freeze it. They say he killed anyone who knew the exact location. Maybe he missed one. My pulse quickened. Vince Morelli. Kincaid nodded. Morelli was the bishop's protégé and his Judas. He cut a deal with the Bureau, then vanished before they could use him. The bishop's been hunting him ever since. Then why's Vince here now? Because he thinks he can finish what he started. But trust me, once that kind of blood money surfaces, it pulls every ghost with it. I turned toward the casino's entrance. So what do? He gave a grim smile. We make sure history doesn't repeat itself. By the time we got back inside, the casino felt alive again. Lights flickering through the power was still cut, faint strains of jazz floating from nowhere. The ghosts of gamblers passed, keeping their nightly vigil. We went down into the vault together. Kincaid moved slower, his breathing heavy. Lung cancer, he muttered when he caught my glance. Guess the sins finally started collecting interest. I forced a smile. Then let's make it worth something, He shone his flashlight across the crates. "Still here," he said softly. $44 million in unmarked bills, enough to buy redemption, or damnation, depending on who's holding it. I studied the stacks of money, the faded symbols on the wooden crates, the stale air thick with old crimes. "If we expose this," I said, "we'll bring down everyone who ever touched it." "Yeah," he said, "including me." His honesty hit harder than a confession. I realized then that Kincaid wasn't here to save himself. He was here to make peace with his ghosts. As we stood there, a faint metallic sound echoed from above. A door hinge. Kincaid drew his revolver, eyes narrowing. "He's here." The flashlight flickered once, twice, then died. In the darkness I heard a voice, a low, measured drawl that sent a chill down my spine. "Hello, Miss Brooks," it said. "Detective." The sound of slow applause followed. "Ray, the Bishop Santoro had returned to his church, and the house was open for business again. The moment that voice cut through the dark, every instinct in me screamed run, but there was nowhere to go. The vault door was still sealed behind us, and the only light came from the faint glow of the bishop's cigar ember hovering in the shadows. He stepped forward slowly, his presence commanding and eerily calm. His suit was immaculate, black as the space between stars, his white hair slicked back like polished marble. His eyes, pale grey and sharp as glass, studied me the way a hawk studies something already dead. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone smooth as confession, "I must say, you've done an impressive job digging up history that was better left buried." Kincaid aimed his revolver. "Drop the act, Santoro. You should have stayed gone." The bishop smiled faintly. "Detective Kincaid, I was wondering if the cancer would get you before your conscience did. Guess I lost that bet." The two men locked eyes, the past stretching between them like a noose. I could feel the weight of decades pressing in. The night the casino burned, the bribes, the blood, the silence. "And what do you want?" I asked, forcing my voice to steady. He flicked his cigar ash onto the vault floor. "My money, of course, or what's left of it." "There's 44 million down here," I said. "Enough to buy an empire. Why wait 20 years to come for it?" He smiled, but his eyes never warmed. "Timing, Miss Brooks. In this life, everything is about timing. The feds are too busy chasing communists to remember old mob ghosts. The world's distracted. It's a perfect moment for resurrection." I didn't move. "And Vince Morelli? Where does he fit into your resurrection?" The bishop chuckled. "Ah, Vincent, my lost disciple. He sold me out to the Bureau, but like most traitors, he believed he could negotiate morality. Thought he could have both penance and profit. When I heard he'd found his way back to Las Ventana, I knew the money wouldn't stay hidden for long." He leaned closer, his voice lowering. "Then came you, a washed-up reporter with a conscience too heavy and pockets too light. A perfect vessel." I flinched at that word. Vessel. Kincaid raised his weapon higher. "You're not taking a damn thing, Santoro. This money belongs to the feds now." The bishop tilted his head. "You think the government wants clean money, detective? No. They'll launder it with a new name and call it Reconstruction. You've lived long enough to know that." He gestured toward the crates. "You see, it never changes. Institutions, gangsters, reporters, lawmen, we all deal in the same currency. Faith and greed." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Finally, the bishop spoke again, almost kindly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to help me move this money, Miss Brooks. We'll run it through legitimate fronts, real estate, trucking, casinos. You'll write the stories that make it all look clean." "Not a chance," I said. He stepped closer, the glow of his cigar painting the outline of his jaw. "You misunderstand. I'm not offering you a choice. You'll do it because survival always trumps integrity." Something inside me hardened then, the same part of me that once believed exposing the truth mattered, even when it ruined me. I met his gaze without flinching. You overestimate my survival instinct. He smiled. We'll see. Suddenly there was movement at the far end of the vault, a shadow stepping out from behind a stack of crates. Vince Morelli. His gun was drawn, but his eyes darted between the bishop and me, uncertainty flickering there. "Put it down, Vince," the bishop said softly. "You never were built for violence." Vince swallowed. "You don't have to do this, Ray. The world moved on. The money's cursed." The bishop's smile faded. "Only for the unworthy." In a blur his hand flashed, drawing a pistol from his jacket. The shot echoed like thunder in a tomb. Vince staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. I screamed, ducking behind a crate as Kincaid fired back. 2 bullets slammed into the concrete, sparks flying. The bishop moved with the patience of a man who'd practiced this dance his entire life. When the gunfire stopped, the vault was smoke and silence. Kincaid was on one knee, coughing, gun trembling in his grip. The bishop stepped over him, pressing the barrel of his pistol against the detective's forehead. "You had your chance for redemption," he whispered. "Now it's mine." I acted without thinking. Grabbing a fallen piece of rebar, I swung hard. The metal cracked against the bishop's wrist, sending his gun skittering across the floor. Kincaid rolled away, gasping. The bishop turned on me, expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, I saw something almost human flicker in his eyes. Admiration, maybe, or curiosity. "You've got grit," he said. "I see why Vince liked you." He lunged. I stumbled back, my hand brushing against one of the old vault levers. Instinct took over. I yanked it down. The heavy steel door behind him began to swing shut with a mechanical groan. The bishop spun, realizing too late what I'd done. He tried to dash out, but the edge of the door caught his arm, pinning him. He bared his teeth, fury boiling out of him. "You think this ends with you, Miss Brooks? You think the truth will set you free? It only makes you a target." His voice dropped to a hiss. "This town was built on buried lies. You dig too deep and the earth takes you with it." The door slammed shut with a thunderous clang, sealing him inside the vault. The sound echoed through the casino like a final judgment. I fell to my knees, trembling, the air heavy with dust and gunpowder. Vince was slumped against a wall, bleeding but alive. Kincaid stumbled over, clutching his side. "You all right?" I asked. He gave a pained grin. "Define all right." We stared at the sealed vault door together. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence felt sacred somehow, like a confession completed. Finally, Kincaid holstered his weapon and said quietly, "You just locked the devil in his own church." I looked at the cracked concrete beneath us, at the blood, the smoke. "The fortune buried once again. Then let's make sure he never preaches again." Outside, the wind howled through Las Ventana, carrying the scent of smoke and salvation. The desert didn't care about sin or justice. It only buried what humans left behind. But for the first time since I'd bought that cursed casino, I felt like I'd finally made the right bet. By morning, the desert had gone quiet again. The kind of quiet that follows violence. The kind that feels like the world itself is holding its breath. Kincaid and I sat in the diner, the same cracked booth where Lydia had once warned me to leave this town alone. The old detective looked worse for wear, his arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage, skin pale beneath the yellow light. Vince was upstairs in one of the old motel rooms, nursing his shoulder wound. I wasn't sure whether to trust him or finish what the bishop started. Lydia poured coffee into our cups, her hands shaking just slightly. "They say a storm's coming," she murmured. "Desert storm, not the kind with thunder, the kind that brings ghosts." I wanted to tell her the ghosts were already here. Kincaid stirred his coffee, staring at it like it might confess something. "You realize," he said, "we can't just leave the money down there. The bishop's people will come looking. The feds, too. Hell, maybe both at once." "That vault's sealed," I said. "He's sealed. Bodies don't stay buried forever. Not in Nevada soil." He wasn't wrong. The bishop might have been locked away, but his empire still pulsed in the shadows, names, connections, debts unpaid. The vault was only the symptom. The disease was the town itself. Lydia sat down across from us, her expression unreadable. You ever wonder why Las Ventana never died completely? She asked. Why the neon still flickers, even though the power company shut off the grid years ago? I shook my head. It's because someone kept paying the bills, she said. In cash, every month since 1943, Kincaid's head snapped up. Who? Lydia reached into her purse and set a small leather notebook on the table. It was old, the cover cracked, the pages yellowed and fragile. I've been keeping something for a long time. Didn't know why until now. I opened it carefully. The first page was a ledger, names, dates, dollar amounts. Not gambling records, payments, bribes, judges, sheriffs, state auditors, even senators. Each entry was written in the same looping hand, signed at the bottom, with a name that made my pulse quicken. R. Santoro. It's the ledger. Kincaid breathed. The bishop's real insurance policy. Lydia nodded. He used the casino to wash dirty money through clean hands. Every time someone took a cut, he wrote it down. Kept receipts for the sins of every man who sold his soul. Where did you get this? I asked. Her eyes softened. It belonged to someone I loved. A man named Eddie Crane. He worked the count room, helped hide the bishop's cash when the feds came sniffing. When he tried to leave, they found him dead in the desert. I found this under our bed a week later. Kincaid took a slow breath. This ledger could burn half the state house. And maybe, Lydia said, clean what's left of it. I stared down at the pages, my fingers trembling. Every name was a story, every number a nail in someone's coffin. If I published it, I'd expose one of the biggest criminal cover-ups in the West. It would resurrect my career, redeem me, but it would also destroy lives, maybe even mine. Lydia reached across the table, her voice soft. You came here looking for a second chance, Joanna. Maybe this is it. Before I could answer, the diner door creaked open. Vince Morelli limped in, his face pale but determined. He looked like a man carrying a secret he couldn't hold much longer. I heard you talking, he said. About the ledger, Kincaid tensed. Sit down, Vince. He didn't. That book doesn't belong to you. It's blood money on paper, the kind of thing people kill to keep buried. Like you? I asked. Vince's expression flickered. Hurt, guilt, maybe both. You think I wanted any of this? I was 22 when I joined the Ace. The bishop promised me the world. Said I'd be part of something bigger than myself. He laughed bitterly. Turns out I was. I just didn't know it was a grave. I stood, holding the ledger against my chest. If this comes out, every name in it goes down. Including yours, he nodded slowly. I know. Kincaid rose too. So what are you going to do, Vince? Run? Sell us out again? Vince looked at me. No, I'm going to end it. For good. In a flash, he reached for the ledger. I pulled back, but he was faster, snatching it from my hands. The pages tore slightly under his grip. Vince, don't... I started. But it was too late. He pulled a lighter from his pocket, flicked it open, and pressed the flame to the corner of the ledger. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the paper caught fire, curling black, ink dissolving into smoke. Lydia gasped. No! I grabbed for it, but Kincaid caught my arm. Let him, he said quietly. Vince watched the book burn, eyes wet with something between sorrow and relief. You can't cleanse this town with fire, he said. You can only cauterize it. When the last page turned to ash, he dropped the remains into an empty ashtray. The room smelled like scorched paper and regret. That was the only proof, I whispered. Vince looked at me with that same broken charm. You don't need proof to tell the truth, Joanna. You just need courage. He turned and walked out of the diner, the door swinging shut behind him. Kincaid sighed. He's a fool. Maybe, I said. But maybe fools are the only ones brave enough to end things. Lydia stared at the ashes. The bishop's gone, but his reach isn't. You'd better decide fast who you want to be when his friends come looking. I looked out the diner window. The desert wind had started again, swirling dust across the empty streets. The neon from the Golden Ace flickered in the distance, faint but still alive. I thought of all the ghosts buried under its floors, the greedy, the guilty, the hopeful, and realized something I hadn't before. The money didn't corrupt the town. The silence did, and if I wanted redemption, I'd have to break it. I rose from the booth, grabbed my notebook, and looked at Kincaid. "We may have lost the ledger," I said, "but not the story." He gave a slow, proud nod. "Then let's make sure the world hears it." Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of smoke from the diner chimney, curling toward the casino like a signal fire. The dead might keep their secrets, but not for long. By nightfall, Las Ventana was no longer quiet. The town felt tense, expectant, like the desert itself knew something was coming. The neon of the Golden Ace flickered against the storm clouds gathering above, each flash of red and blue painting the streets in ghostly hues. I sat in my car outside the casino, and typewriter on the passenger seat, fingers trembling over a notepad. Every instinct I had screamed leave, but there was no leaving. Not until I'd finished what the bishop started, and what Vince had tried to erase. Kincaid's voice echoed in my head from earlier that evening. "If you go back in there, you're walking into the lion's den." He wasn't wrong, but the story demanded an ending, and if Las Ventana had taught me anything, it was that truth never comes cheap. I stepped out of the car, the wind biting against my face, and crossed the cracked asphalt toward the casino doors. They swung open on their own. The power was supposed to be dead. Yet every slot machine inside pulsed faintly, casting ghost light across the marble floor. The air smelled of copper and ozone, like rain and gun oil. "Joanna Brooks," a voice called from the upper balcony. I froze. The bishop stood above, alive. Dust and blood streaked his once perfect suit, but his eyes burned with a steady, frightening clarity. "I told you the earth doesn't keep what belongs to me," he said. My heart thudded. "The vault, how—" "Concrete cracks," he interrupted. Descending the staircase, with the grace of a man who believed gravity was optional. "Men dig, faithful men." Behind him, two others appeared, hulking silhouettes with pistols gleaming in their hands. The bishop's lieutenants, remnants of his old empire. The ghosts had indeed come crawling home. "You should have taken my offer," he said. "You could have been the one to resurrect this town. Instead, you tried to bury me with it." "I wasn't trying to bury you," I said, backing toward the stage. "I was trying to bury what you built." He smiled faintly. "Same thing." The sound of an engine roared outside, then the sharp crack of a gunshot. I flinched. Through the front doors stumbled Kincaid, revolver in one hand, blood soaking through his jacket. "Party's not over yet," he wheezed. The bishop's men turned. Kincaid fired twice, the blasts echoing off the mirrored walls. One man dropped instantly. The other fired back, the bullet grazing Kincaid's arm. He ducked behind a roulette table, breathing hard. "Detective," the bishop said coldly, "you should have stayed in your grave." "Could say the same to you," Kincaid rasped, firing again. The bishop's remaining guard fell. For a brief, impossible moment, it was just the three of us. The journalist, the dying detective, and the devil who wouldn't die. "You think this changes anything?" the bishop said, voice almost weary. "Money is eternal. Corruption just changes its face." He raised his gun. I dove behind the stage bar, glass shattering as a bullet tore through the bottles above. Whiskey sprayed the air like rain. Kincaid coughed violently, blood splattering the cards scattered on the floor. He looked at me across the room. "The ledger's gone, kid," he said. "So make this count." Something in me shifted then, fear turning to resolve. I remembered what Vince had said before he disappeared. "You can't cleanse this town with fire. You can only cauterize it." Maybe he'd been right about both. I crawled toward the trapdoor, still half open from before, and shouted to Kincaid, "Get him near the stage." Kincaid nodded weakly, stepping into the open. "Hey, Bishop," he yelled hoarsely, "you ever wonder what redemption feels like?" The bishop turned toward him, gun raised. "It's overrated." That was his mistake. As he fired, I kicked the switch beside the stage, the one I'd found earlier, connected to the old maintenance power grid. The lights flickered, then surged. For a split second, the entire casino roared back to life. Slot machines spun, music blared through the broken speakers, and beneath the stage, the ancient machinery of the secondary vault door began to move. The bishop froze, realizing too late what was happening. The floor beneath him shuddered. Metal groaned. I climbed out from behind the bar, shouting over the rising noise. "You built this place on lies. Let it collapse on them." The floor gave way. The bishop fell, grabbing the edge of the stage, his fingers clawing the wood. "You think this makes you righteous?" he snarled. "You'll drown in the same filth as the rest of us." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll go down telling the truth." He slipped. The vault swallowed him whole. The floor collapsed inward, concrete and dust erupting in a thunderous cloud. When the echo died, the Golden Ace was silent again, except for the faint hum of the neon outside. I coughed through the smoke and stumbled toward Kincaid. He was on his back, still breathing, but barely. I knelt beside him, pressing my hand against his wound. "You're gonna be okay," I lied. He smiled faintly. "Don't bother lying to a dying man, kid. I've done enough of it myself." I squeezed his hand. "Why'd you come back?" "Because—" He coughed, a red bloom on his lips. "You reminded me what honesty looks like. Had to see it one more time." His eyes drifted shut before I could say another word. The neon outside flickered violently, then steadied. Through the shattered casino windows, I saw the first streaks of dawn breaking over the desert horizon. I stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle over the wreckage. Somewhere beneath my feet lay $44 million, and the man who'd killed for it. But the story wasn't over. By midday, sirens wailed across Las Ventana, federal cars, state troopers, crime scene vans, all flooding a town that had tried so hard to stay forgotten. Lydia arrived, eyes wet, but unafraid. I told her what happened. She didn't ask how I'd survived, just looked around the ruin of the casino and whispered, "Maybe now it can rest." I wasn't sure she meant the building or the town itself. As agents began hauling out the crates from the vault debris, I stood by the broken sign outside, the Golden Ace, its last remaining tube buzzing weakly. I pulled out my notepad, tore a page from it, and scrawled the headline, "The Casino That Tried to Bury the Truth." For the first time in years, my hands didn't shake when I typed. Kincaid was gone. Vince was missing. The bishop was buried under his empire. And I, Joanna Brooks, was finally back in the business of truth. But as I looked at the red glow of the last working neon letter, ACE, I couldn't shake one thought. In Las Ventana, nothing stays buried forever. Not the money, not the sins, and not the truth. It took less than 48 hours for Las Ventana to turn into a media circus. Federal agents swarmed the ruins of the Golden Ace, digging up crates of cash that had slept under the desert for 2 decades. Reporters camped along Main Street, hungry for headlines. TV vans hummed like locusts beneath the buzzing neon. And right in the center of it all was me, Joanna Brooks, the woman who'd bought a ghost for 15 cents and found the sins of an empire buried beneath it. I should have felt triumphant. My article, "The Casino That Tried to Bury the Truth," had gone national within hours of publication. Every news outlet from San Francisco to New York quoted my name, my words, my discovery. But I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow. Because the truth, when it finally surfaced, didn't set anyone free. It just exposed how many of us were already chained to it. The morning after the story broke, I sat outside Lydia Crane's diner with a cigarette I didn't plan to light. The wind carried the scent of coffee and desert dust. The radio inside was tuned to Tommy Vega's morning show, the same voice that had once spread rumors about a mystery millionaire in town. Federal investigators have confirmed that the Golden Ace Casino was used as a money laundering front for the Santoro syndicate, he said. Local hero Joanna Brooks uncovered the hidden vault after purchasing the building in a foreclosure auction. I switched it off. Lydia stepped outside, apron dusted with flour, a faint smile on her tired face. "You did it," she said softly. "Did I?" I looked toward the casino. It stood behind police tape, its roof caved in, the last of the neon still flickering stubbornly. "Kincaid's dead, Vince is gone. The bishop's buried under half a ton of concrete. What exactly did I win? She joined me on the steps, sitting with the slow grace of someone who'd carried too many memories. You didn't win, honey. You just stopped losing. I wanted to believe her. She handed me a folded envelope. This came for you this morning. No return address. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind gangsters and politicians both seemed to favor. Inside was a single casino chip from the Golden Ace, gold-edged and worn. Beneath it a short note, for your next gamble. Wie my breath caught, Vince Morelli, so he was alive. Somewhere out there, breathing the same air, holding on to whatever pieces of himself hadn't been lost to greed. I stared at the chip, my reflection warped in its metallic surface. He's still playing the game, I muttered. Lydia nodded. Maybe. Or maybe that's his way of folding. She reached into her pocket and placed something else in my palm, a small silver cross, tarnished but solid. Kincaid left this with me before he went after the bishop. Said if you made it out, you'd know what to do with it. I felt the weight of it, cold and real. The detective's last act wasn't vengeance. It was faith, in me, in the story, in something bigger than both. The wind picked up, rattling the diner's old sign. Across the street, agents hauled out the last of the evidence. Money sealed in plastic bags, labels marked Exhibit C. One of them nodded at me in passing, respectful but distant. To them, I was just the witness. To me, I was the evidence. By nightfall, the crowds began to fade. The TV crews packed up, chasing newer tragedies in newer towns. Only the locals remained, watching from their porches, wondering if the curse of the Golden Ace had finally lifted. I drove out past the edge of town, where the sand swallowed the road and the stars felt close enough to touch. That's where Kincaid was buried, quietly, with no ceremony. The government wouldn't grant him honors, not after his past. But Lydia and I made sure he didn't vanish into the dust. I stood by his marker, a simple stone etched with his name. The cross he'd left me hung heavy around my neck. I told your story, I whispered. All of it, the desert didn't answer. It rarely did. I crouched down, pressing my hand to the sand. They'll know now. What you did, what you gave up. Maybe someone will learn from it. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. Lessons don't last. People forget. The same way they forgot Las Ventana until greed came calling again. The stars shimmered faintly above me, cold and indifferent. Somewhere far to the south, thunder rolled. I turned back toward town. The next morning, Lydia announced she was closing the diner. Time to start somewhere else, she said. Maybe Tucson. Maybe Santa Fe. I've spent too long feeding ghosts. I hugged her tightly before she left. The diner had always smelled of nostalgia and burnt coffee. Now it just smelled empty. As her car disappeared down the highway, I realized Las Ventana was finally, truly dying. No gamblers, no dealers, no more neon hum. Just me and the echoes. For the first time since I'd arrived, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I spent the day at my desk in the old motel, typing the epilogue to my article. My headline had already made the front page, but this was for me, Aftermath in Las Ventana. By Joanna Brooks, The Desert Doesn't Forgive or Forget. It only waits. The Golden Ace stood for 2 decades as a monument to corruption, a church of greed disguised as a casino. Its congregation is gone now, its pastor entombed beneath the weight of his own sins. But the real story isn't about stolen millions. It's about what people trade for survival. Some sell their names, some sell their silence, some sell the truth. I've done all 3, but for once I chose to buy it back. I mailed the draft to my editor the next morning, then walked out of the motel and down the main street. The air smelled of rain, a rare thing in the desert. When I reached the ruins of the Golden Ace, the police tape flapped in the wind like tattered prayer flags. I ducked under it, stepping carefully across the debris. The vault entrance was gone, sealed forever in concrete. But a piece of the stage still stood, jagged and splintered. I climbed onto it and sat down. From my pocket, I pulled out the gold-edged poker chip Vince had sent. I turned it over in my fingers, feeling its worn edges, then placed it gently on the floor. For the ones who never got their second chance, I whispered. Then I walked away. Behind me, the neon flickered one last time, red, then blue, then nothing. The house had finally gone dark, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need the lights to see where I was going. It was 10 years before I saw Las Ventana again. By then, the world had moved on. Cities grew taller, headlines grew shorter, and truth became something people subscribed to instead of believed in. I had built a new career out of the ashes of the old one. Articles, interviews, even a memoir that made just enough noise to be forgotten in a week. But the desert doesn't forget. When I drove back into Las Ventana in the spring of 1973, I expected to find nothing left but sand and silence. I wasn't far off. The town was half swallowed by the dunes, the last gas station boarded up, the diner long gone. The old road sign still leaned at an angle, sun-bleached letters barely spelling out, "Welcome to Las Ventana." The brightest lights in Nevada. There were no lights anymore, only ghosts. The golden ace stood at the center, its bones still visible through the ruin. The roof had collapsed completely, leaving only a jagged outline against the sky. The once famous neon sign lay rusting in the dirt, the word ace faintly legible through the dust. I parked beside it and stepped out into the wind. It smelled of sagebrush and old storms. The same smell from the day I bought this cursed place for 15 cents. The desert sun was brutal, but I walked inside anyway. The floor was cracked concrete now, the stage buried under layers of sand and time. The vault, the blood, the fortune, everything that had happened here was gone, absorbed into the earth like a secret too tired to keep fighting. I ran my fingers along one of the crumbling walls, feeling the faint grooves where paint had once spelled out the Golden Ace Casino, where every hand is a winner. Not quite true, was it? I murmured. A soft echo answered me, the wind through broken glass, the faint jingle of something metallic. I looked down. Half buried in the sand lay a poker chip. Faded gold edges, the same haloed spade stamped at its center. One of the last survivors of the old world. I picked it up and brushed off the dust. It felt heavier than I remembered. Maybe because it carried the weight of everyone who'd touched it. Lydia, Kincaid, Vince, the bishop. Every soul who'd gambled with greed and lost. I set up my old tape recorder on a piece of collapsed beam and pressed the red button. The reels began to spin with that comforting, fragile hum. "This is Joanna Brooks," I said softly, my voice raspier than I remembered. "It's been 10 years since the night the Golden Ace fell. I thought I'd tell one last story, if only to hear it myself." I paused, watching the horizon shimmer. When I first came to Las Ventana, I was running from my own mistakes. I thought truth was a weapon, and if I used it hard enough, it could cut through anything. But I learned something here. Truth isn't sharp. It's heavy. It doesn't slice clean. It drags you down until you learn how to carry it. I closed my eyes. Kincaid taught me that redemption doesn't erase guilt. It just makes peace with it. Lydia showed me that love, even after loss, is still the bravest thing a person can choose. And Vince, I hesitated, the wind tugging at my hair. Vince reminded me that temptation isn't always evil. Sometimes it's just the part of us that still believes we deserve more. The wind shifted, whistling through the broken beams like a ghost sighing. I've spent a decade trying to rebuild what I lost, I continued. But I think I understand now. What happened here wasn't a curse. It was a mirror. The casino didn't destroy this town. It just reflected what we already were, hungry, desperate, human. I switched off the recorder and sat in silence. The desert stretched endless around me, gold and empty and infinite. For a moment, I thought I saw movement near the far ridge, a shimmer like heat haze, resolving into the shape of a man walking toward the horizon. A grey suit, hands in pockets, head bowed against the wind. It couldn't be Vince. He would have aged, vanished, changed names a dozen times. But the walk, it was him. The ghost paused once, turning slightly as if he knew I was watching. Then he raised a hand, half wave, half farewell, and kept walking until the sand swallowed him whole. I didn't chase. Some ghosts deserve their distance. I took the poker chip from my pocket and knelt by the ruins of the stage. There was no vault anymore, no neon glow, no trace of what had once consumed this town. Just dust, sunlight, and memory. I dug a small hollow in the sand and set the chip inside. For them, I whispered. For the ones who played and lost, and for the ones who learned too late that the house always wins. Covering it with sand, I pressed my palm flat against the spot. The ground was warm, almost alive, as if the desert were finally exhaling. When I stood, the horizon was burning gold, the day folding into dusk. I turned back to my car. As I reached for the door handle, something caught my eye. The faintest flicker from the ruined casino sign. For just a second, one of the old neon tubes sparked to life, a pulse of blue light. Then red, then gone. I smiled. Goodbye, Las Ventana. The drive out was long and silent. The desert swallowed the road behind me as the last light faded. When I reached the highway, I pulled over and opened my notebook. The same one I'd carried since the day I arrived here. The pages were yellowed, corners bent, but still full of stories. I wrote one last line at the bottom. In Las Ventana, every jackpot comes rigged. But sometimes you don't play to win. You play to remember who you are. I closed the notebook, feeling the weight of it against my chest. The truth had cost me everything once. My name, my safety, the illusion that good people always win. But it had given me something greater, the ability to live with what I couldn't change. As I started the car and drove into the night, the desert stretched endlessly ahead, dark, vast, and forgiving. Behind me, the wind rose again, whispering across the dunes. And if you listened closely, you could almost hear it say, in Las Ventana, the house always wins. Unless you bet everything on the truth. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.